Aurelian forced the rusted clasp, and the folio cracked open under his fingers. Inked sigils along the first page flared a faint cold light, and a gust moved the candle flames. Suspicion tightened his jaw as he felt the quick, clinical recognition that the manuscript was not a catalogue, but a map for action. He did not speak. Lissa pressed forward and said, "Look at this, Aurelian." Her voice hit the rows of desks and brought Thomas from the archive door. The central problem was immediate. A sealed folio that might record names only, or might record a living ritual. That choice, to catalogue or to contain, would decide whether men read history or invoked it. Aurelian kept his right hand on the folio and tapped the corner with his knuckle to test the vellum. He had spent a lifetime testing edges. Bindings, water stains, ink composition. He worked by touch. He ran a fingertip along the sigil's outer circle and felt a cold trace like someone breathing on his skin. He felt curiosity push him forward, then pulled back by a second emotion. Dread, suspicion and curiosity crossed in his chest and redirected his hands. He lifted the candle with his left hand and shuffled the pages with careful pressure. Lisa leaned in, her sleeve brushing parchment dust. "Aurelian, this is older than the scriptorium rolls. See the hand. This rubric isn't from our region." Her words were quick, factual. "They spoken here as evidence, not drama." Aurelian answered. "Thomas, come look." Now his voice remained a controlled baritone, measured like an archivist calling for confirmation. The manuscript's opening presented the conflict, whether to expose it to scholars or lock it away, and that conflict filled the chamber with immediate purpose. They carried the folio to the archive chamber beneath the scriptorium. Aurelian held the volume against his chest under the wool overcoat. The stair smelled of damp stone and resin. Lissa's lamp swung and cut the tunnel into strips of light. Aurelian's motion showed concern. He did not cover the sigils, but he angled the folio toward himself as if to shield an occult afterimage. He felt an emotion shift, suspicion lead to guarded curiosity. He planned to have the text verified, not circulated. The problem had been stated in action, not in a vow. Scriptorium keeper Thomas unlatched the metal cart and pulled the folio free with deliberate hands. He breathed once and said, "This binding is sealed with a wax I do not recognize. If the threading is intact, the folio has not left a private hand in decades." Thomas' voice contained responsibility. He touched the outer leaf without pressing. He kept his palms steady. Aurelian handed the folio across the table. He watched Thomas check the fibers and then draw the lamp closer. The exchange became a test. Aurelian wanted authentication. Thomas considered restriction. Their motives separated in concrete gestures. Thomas set a magnifier above a script and called out ink details, dark iron gall with a contaminant of verdigris. Northern mixture, not local. Date could be early 12th century or later imitation. He pushed a finger to a marginal notation and frowned. Lissa crouched and traced the marginalia with the tip of a bone folder. "This fold here isn't marginalia. It's a scrap stitched inside." Someone folded it and burned the corner on purpose. She the last words with a quick breath and a tightening at her fingers. The room responded. The problem hardened. The folio contained evidence of ritual use. Aurelian, who placed the burn, he did not say suspicion aloud. He let the question operate as procedure. Thomas answered, "Either the owner who feared discovery or the binder trying to stop a reading. Either way, we must authenticate before any replication." Brother Merrick arrived then, boots soft on stone, and stood in the doorframe with oppressed habit. His expression closed like a lid. "He who has handled that without permission." Brother Merrick's voice carried the institutional weight of containment. The confrontation was concrete and immediate. They argued in short lines. "Thomas, we need samples for carbon dating." "Aurelian, we must know its age before we decide. If you publish the rites, you endanger parishioners." "Brother Merrick, if you destroy the folio, you throw away a historical record." Aurelian shot back. "Aurelian, silence," Thomas warned. And he moved to the lamp to shield the script from drafts. The argument contained 3 rapid exchanges that positioned authority and motive. Each man touched the folio to stake a claim. Interest, caution, protection. Lisa unfolded the folded scrap and read aloud the burn notation. She read the lines slowly. Seal clause. Bind names until command. Never call the kings by their throne names alone. Her voice cracked over the word kings. The group shifted. The marginalia rearranged the catalogue into a hierarchical instrument and appended a sealed clause. Lissa tapped the parchment with a steady finger. Someone used this in ceremony. Aurelian's hand tightened on the table. The emotional register moved. Curiosity into concern into quiet urgency. Aurelian proposed a controlled test. He cleared a shallow alcove near the scriptorium and arranged a copied sigil on new parchment. He specified constraints: copied ink, sealed circle of chalk, salted ring, and a single trained witness. Thomas insisted on seals and written promise. Brother Merrick demanded a prayer be added to the perimeter. Lisa volunteered to trace the sigil. The scene was all procedure and equipment. No veiled metaphors, actions established stakes. They set the copied sigil in a narrow ritual alcove. Aurelian instructed Lisa to trace while he monitored temperature, and Thomas recorded observations. Lisa dipped a quill and moved her hand with practiced steadiness. Lisa, steady Aurelian, do not deviate from the line, she answered. I won T, Aurelian. The ritual action was precise. Ink strokes, salt placement, a ring of chalk pressed to measured thickness. Aurelian counted aloud as she finished each outer glyph. The methodical pacing limited risk and highlighted authority. When Lisa finished the last stroke, the copied ink shivered. Aurelian felt it through his fingertips as a minute vibration. A cold breath slid across the alcove and carried the smell of alder smoke, though nothing burned. Thomas drew a hand back from the folio as if repelled. Brother Merrick placed a palm over his chest and mouthed a short prayer. The visceral motion, a draft, a shiver, replaced metaphor. The presence responded with a concrete sign. Emotions shifted again. Uncertainty slid into alarm. A spectral voice answered, no lyric, only concrete words that echoed over stone. Do not call them by throne. The voice identified a sealed clause, a condition Thomas had missed. Lissa stepped back and gripped the bench. Aurelian moved forward and said, What is your name? The voice did not give one. It spoke of binding clauses and of kings who demanded precise titles. Thomas swore under his breath and said, This is more than marginalia. This text was used by practitioners who knew ritual law. The revelation altered their understanding of the folio. A participant had used this book in living rites, not for study. The spectral presence revealed an unexpected fact. The marginalia was not a private annotation, but a correction from a scribe who had interrupted a ceremony. Lissa found another folded note beneath the sleeve. She read the line aloud. Burn this if the kings break the pact. Her hand shook and she dropped the scrap. Brother Merrick stepped forward and picked it up to show Aurelian the scorch marks. Thomas, someone burned the clause before. They must have been terrified enough to mar their own instrument. The detail reframed the folio as dangerous and used. Aurelian decided to test the scope of the sigil. He stood with a scrap copy and prepared a small binding ritual to limit any summoning. He instructed Thomas to hold the salt and Brother Merrick to recite an approved prayer that would not invoke names. Lisa insisted on the exact stroke sequence and volunteered to trace again. Lisa, do not breathe on the ink, Aurelian. Thomas, be ready to smudge with ash if it moves. The plan was technical, not theatrical, and it relied on precise human actions to control risk. When Lissa completed the second trace, the ink pulsed and a dark pressure pressed at the circle's perimeter like a hand seeking entry. Aurelian felt the temperature drop and saw Lysa's shoulders lock. She reeled and gasped. The light in her eyes shifted to focus on some point beyond the candle flames. The incipient presence probed. Thomas moved to smudge the ink with ash, but Brother Merrick stopped him and said, Wait, do not blind it. We must know its words. Aurelian hesitated, deciding between safety and knowledge. The emotional arc moved from controlled curiosity into a sharp fear. The pressure intensified and Lissa received a shock of alder, cold that forced her to kneel. Aurelian lunged and tore the copied marginalia from the sheet and thrust it into the hearth. He struck flint and set the scrap to flame. The fire took immediately, blackening the edges and curling the sigil. The pressure released. Lissa cuffed, her face white, and Thomas steadied her under the arm. Brother Merrick spoke with a clipped voice. Never again. The incursion had peaked, and they had acted to halt it. The climax had occurred exactly where the folio's power had been tested. Smoke and embers settled, and the scriptorium smelled of burned vellum. Aurelian checked Lissa's pulse and found it quick. She held a trembling hand to her chest. Thomas placed the scorched scrap on a table and examined the remaining marginalia. The burn marks are not random. Whoever seared this wanted to erase a clause but preserve the names. Aurelian listened and felt a new twist arrive. The folio might have been altered by someone trying to conceal or control a list of authorities. The twist changed how Aurelian would treat provenance. The manuscript contained deliberate obfuscation. Brother Merrick accused Aurelian with a hard line. You brought this into our halls and played with dangerous things. You risked the scriptorium, Aurelian replied. I tested it under strict conditions. I recorded outcomes. Thomas pushed back. Recording is different from publishing. We must decide whether to lock it or to copy it into our restricted ledger. The argument moved in brisk exchanges. There were 3 rapid lines of counterclaim and defense that pushed decision-making. The choice became communal, not solitary. They argued through the night. Lissa sat wrapped in an extra cloak and kept touching her forearm where the cold had bitten. Her hands did small, repetitive motions, tapping a thumb along her palm, rubbing the same knuckle while she listened. Aurelian wrote a cautious, coded entry into his private ledger in dawn light, describing only test conditions and not the clause's specific language. He used measured, factual lines. He locked the ledger and slid it inside a chest with a separate key. By first light, smoke stains lingered on the stone, and the folio rested under a fresh cloth with its scorch marks visible at the edge. Thomas and Brother Merrick stood on either side of the table. Thomas, we can catalogue the folio but remove the marginalia and lock it in the reliquary. We will allow only restricted access, Brother Merrick replied, or we can burn the manuscript and deny its knowledge to all. The dispute narrowed to an operational decision. Aurelian looked at Lissa and then at the folio. He chose a middle path. He removed the smallest burned scrap and concealed it inside a false leaf he created within the folio binding. He recorded a coded entry that explained the night's events without naming the clause. He sealed the folio again and placed it inside a locked chest with a duplicate set of keys given only to Thomas and himself. He watched Thomas secure the chest with a quiet, precise motion. Aurelian then spoke a single line. We will study, but we will not call them by throne. The line tied action to restraint. Aurelian left the archive at dawn with the chest on the cart and Lissa at his elbow holding her lamp. He felt a final emotion shift. Alarm had settled into a resolute caution. He smelled smoke on his fingers and the faint resin of the lamp. He walked to his private study, set the chest beneath a table, and wrote a new ledger entry that masked the marginalia with catalogue numbers and dates. He closed his pocket watch and held it in his palm for a steadying beat. The chapter closed on a concrete motion. He sealed his coded note and slid the folio under the locked chest, where it would remain until they decided whether to reveal or to bury what they had unsealed. At the last moment, as he turned to leave, Lissa called his name and held out a small scorch-marked scrap she had kept hidden. She, Aurelian, read this. It names a king differently. He took the scrap with gloved fingers and read a single burned word that altered the order of names. The scrap forced the next decision into view. Aurelian put the scrap into his inner coat pocket and buttoned the coat over it. He closed the door of his study and set the chest under the table, then struck the iron latch into place with his hand. The chapter ends with the concrete beat of a lock sliding home. A heavy knock rattled the cellar door as the ink on the sigil jumped, and Aurelian slammed his hand down on the folio. Suspicion tightened his jaw. He tasted copper on his tongue and counted heartbeats by the way the candle flame bobbed. Isolde froze with the quill poised, breathing shallow through her nose, fingers trembling on the vellum. Brother Cadmus Bootthuds advanced across stone. His silhouette filled the threshold for a single breath. The problem was immediate. Continue the rite and risk exposure, or conceal the manuscript and lose the chance to test the binding. That choice bent every motion in the room. He had not come to this cellar for spectacle. Aurelian moved like a man who had read the margins of 1,000 texts and believed that certainty was earned through touch. He remembered, in precise detail, prying the rusted clasp free and the folio's first page flaring a cold light. That earlier moment had told him the manuscript was not an inventory but a protocol. That memory pushed his suspicion into action now. He snapped the folio shut, pressed his palm to the cover, and looked at Isolde with a silent question. She answered with a small, almost imperceptible nod. The cellar smelled of damp mortar and boiled leather. Aurelian rose, keeping the grimoire flat against his chest with one arm, and the engraved silver ring hidden beneath his palm. He felt the ring's weight as if it were an extra pulse. The metal was cool, its tiny sigil a raised bump against his skin. Isolde pulled the rented tablecloth over the folio, breath quick, hands moving with the practiced steadiness of someone who had catalogued fragile things for years. She hissed, "Aurelian, done tea," and then cut off when Brother Cadmus' voice carried through the wooden door. "Brother Cadmus," Aurelian called. Matching tone to authority with careful restraint. He opened the cellar hatch and let the light from the scriptorium spill in, arranging himself between the doorway and the table. Suspicion shifted into calculation. He needed to control what Cadmus could see. Cadmus stepped down, robes dusted with archive grime, eyes sharp under a furrowed brow. "What are you doing in a cellar at this hour?" Cadmus demanded. Isolde answered first. "We were testing a transcription, brother." The ink reacted and we wanted to trace the glyph. Her voice hit the exact tone of contrition mixed with professional curiosity. Cadmus did not lower his gaze. "You know the rules," he said. "No experiments without oversight." He walked the perimeter, hands clasped in front, and his presence rearranged the risk calculus. The argument that would follow would not be private. Aurelian met Cadmus' eyes and did not lie. "We had to verify whether the marking was ornamental or operational," he said. "The folio suggests architecture, not ornament. If I can demonstrate binding, we can limit risk." His words were measured. His hands hovered over the covered folio. Suspicion slid into defiance. Cadmus' jaw tightened. Cadmus barked, "You think I must decide between ecclesiastical ruin and your curiosity?" The sentence was a challenge, not a question. Isolde set the quill down and moved behind Aurelian, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Brother Cadmus, the folio burned the sigil into Aurelian's ring last week. There's more here than you admit." Her voice was plain. The claim landed like a stone. Cadmus' expression registered that specific, concrete claim. A burn, a ring, a scar. That single detail shifted the room's angle. They moved into the library antechamber. Light pooled from a single lamp, throwing small pools across tables. Cadmus folded his arms. "Show me the ring then. Show me proof and stop hiding behind grand hypotheses." He did not raise his voice. He used method instead. Aurelian drew the ring from his coat and rolled it to the lamp's edge. The sigil lay faint, red at the rim where metal had cooled. Isolde's hand hovered near the ring, as if to shield it from unbelief. Cadmus inspected the mark and made a face that was neither belief nor dismissal. This could be contact burn. This could be old solder. This could be anything. He tapped the device of proof, sovereign, clinical criteria, against each possibility. The conversation hardened into a public dispute, and the central problem sharpened. Whether to test the rites despite danger and accountability. Aurelian countered, "Due to keen found marginalia that reclassifies certain demons as bound by lineage and ritual architecture." If the folio's framework is correct, these are not solitary spirits. They obey orders, he the name to pull evidence into the room. Isolde pushed a folded scrap across the table, a neat marginal note in Matthias' hand. Cadmus read, pinched bridge of nose. When Matthias Keen arrived, he carried a folio tube and a face that betrayed satisfaction. You were right to show me this, Matthias Aurelian, setting the tube down with a little reverence. He opened it and produced a brittle slip that had been hidden between binding threads. A marginal classification that recast hierarchies into genealogies. These notes change how you bind them. Matthias. His voice held the tremor of an archivist who had found a missing register. Cadmus snapped. And who benefits when demons are arranged into lineages? Who commands the chain? His question landed as accusation. Matthias faltered. He should have met the gaze and explained. Instead, he tightened his lips and said, "It is theoretical," and then stopped. Aurelian watched that hesitation like a surgeon watching a pulse. Suspicion surged into doubt and then into alarm. He felt his hands go slightly clammy. The narrative of their work had shifted. This folio did not merely list names. It proposed mechanisms for controlling entities through enforced succession. Isolde's shoulders lowered. She murmured, "If it's true, practical testing will be necessary." The room's ethical axis shifted in real time. They argued late into the night, voices clipped and deliberate, trading lines of procedure and morality like currency. Isolde, we design parameters that bind, not summon. We restrict, then test for containment. Aurelian replied, containment must be tested on a manifesting principle. Otherwise we write theory without verifying hazard. Cadmus, you risk more than parchment. You risk the house of faith. You risk souls. The exchange was a tight, rapid volley. 3 to 6 lines, raw and efficient. At midnight they returned to Aurelian's study to rewrite parameters. He set the folio under a lamp and arranged ritual implements across the desk. Chalk, sealed water, a cord of iron filaments, Isolde's careful ink, set, and a strip of brass etched with protective names. The description of the room mattered only as it affected choices. The lamp's heat, the iron's resonance under a thumb, the parchment's tendency to curl. They worked in short sentences, checking lists aloud. Isolde read aloud the revised protocol, while Aurelian traced each sigil in space with a gloved finger. We will bind through lineage markers, she said. We will call a name into a prepared architecture, and then use the cord to lock its response to a tether. She paused at the phrase lineage markers and tapped the folio's margin where Matthias' note sat. The plan crystallized through specific actions. The next external event came at pre-dawn when brother Cadmus confronted Matthias in the archival corridor. Cadmus had followed a rumor, and he produced a ledger, a list of donations, coded names, and a fold of receipts. He shoved it into Matthias' hands and said, "Explain these names. Where did they meet, Matthias? Who funded your trips?" Matthias' face changed. He had been careful to keep this compartmentalized. He tried to deflect. "Brother Cadmus, the ledger is patronage." Matthias answered, hands fluttering, "I sought materials." "I did not." Cadmus cut him off with a single sentence sharp as flint. "There are signatures from a convent outside Lyons and a symbol I've seen in other compromised archives." Matthias swallowed. The ledger revealed clandestine ties to a shadow society that revealed bent loyalties. Matthias' colleagues gaped. Isolde, who had followed Cadmus silently, said, "Matthias, you never told us." "Why?" "Because I did not think it mattered until now." His voice lacked conviction. Cadmus closed the ledger. "We cannot trust you to control this then, Matthias. Give us the marginalia and stay away from ritual rooms." The sentence removed Matthias from positional authority and forced him into a new role. Informant under suspicion. Aurelian felt the balance of trust tip. The present emotion shifted. Suspicion became betrayal. He touched the ring in his pocket and felt the old burn like a small scar on his finger. That physical sensation grounded his next choice. He turned to Isolde and said, "We test tonight inside containment. Only the architecture. No prayers of invitation. Do you consent?" She hesitated, thumb rubbing the edge of the folio. "I consent if we place safeties," she said, "if we use the brass tether, the sealed water, and the iron cord. If we document every step and leave the door unlocked in case of interruption." Her voice tightened at the last condition. They arranged the chamber in the rented cellar beneath the scriptorium. Chalk circles measured with a cord, candles set at equal angles, a bowl of salt water, and a brass strip with names hammered in a tiny, exacting hand. They began the controlled invocation that night. Aurelian drew the largest sigil on parchment and placed it at the center of the circle. He traced the outer ring with iron, feeling the metal S scrape register in his palms. Isolde read the formula with precise cadence, while Aurelian intoned the binding phrases in Latin, each syllable clipped and deliberate. The candlelight was exact, casting hard, edged shadows on the stone walls. The folio sat open on a low table. The marginal notes glowed faintly where Matthias had annotated lineage protocols. As the ink pulsed under Aurelian's fingertip, the air acquired a density that they could measure. The candles inhaled a fraction more oxygen per breath, and a faint metallic scent rose from the brass. Isolde's hand trembled, but her voice did not. "Keep counting, Aurelian," she said. "Count the measures." "Hold the cord." He counted and kept his voice flat, a tether to the procedure. Halfway through the sequence, a sound came from above. A low, deliberate knock. Not 3 sharp knocks, but a pattern like someone testing for compliance. The external event snapped through them. Cadmus had burst in, breath ragged, demanding they end the rite. He shouted, "End it now!"
"End it!"
The room's motion changed. Aurelian had 2 options in an instant. Complete the binding and risk the unknown cost, or break the circle and risk an unleashed fire. He felt the second emotion shift, caution tipping into dread. He had rehearsed the doctrine of containment. He had not rehearsed the moral price. Cadmus shoved at the doorway, fingers scraping stone. Isolde stepped between Aurelian and the circle and said, "Aurelian, stop. Break it. Break it now." Her voice had a crack. Aurelian's hand hovered above the sigil. He looked at the ring, felt the raised sigil beneath his thumb, and thought of Matthias' marginalia that described demons as nodes in a network rather than individuals. The manuscript's logic suggested that incomplete binding could attach a partial tether, an anchor with no full circuit. He thought of the brass tether and the iron cord, and then of the chapel fines recorded in the ledger Cadmus had shown. He considered the consequences. He could complete the binding, accept a tether that might burn something into himself, and thus place a control point into the hierarchy. Or he could break the circle and risk dispersal. This was the chapter's climax. The air tightened not as metaphor, but as physical resistance against his lungs. He inhaled, counted the syllables and choices like measures of a scale. He made his decision in actions, not declarations. He pushed the binding half, completed, guiding Isolde's hand to tighten the iron cord, while chanting the final calibrated formula that translated lineage into constraint. The sigil flared, not like flame, but like a pressure building behind the eyes. Matthias slammed into the doorway and reached for the folio. Cadmus tried to pull him back. "Stop. Matthias, fetch water!" Isolde snapped. The scene collapsed into rapid commands and 3 to 6 lines of quick dialogue. Aurelian pressed the brass tether to the parchment and felt a searing heat bite into the metal. He felt the ring on his finger shift, as if the sigil on the metal needed to align with the sigil on the paper. The ring recorded an imprint. There was a sound that none of them had expected, a low vowel, less resonance that rose from the ink itself and settled into the marrow of their teeth. The candle's flare bowed outward and a stray scrap of charred parchment slid into the center of the circle. The entity did not fully arrive, it lodged. It was a partial manifestation, a cuff of presence without a face. Brother Cadmus yelled,
"End it!"
"End it now!" He tried to step into the circle, but Isolde blocked him with both hands. Aurelian completed the last linking motion. Steel met brass, the object of the ritual. This partial presence tightened into a form the brass could hold. The burning sensation raced up his finger and into his ring. A sigil scorched onto its surface. He heard a small, internal click, as if a mechanism within the hierarchy had engaged. Then the room stilled, not relief but a new, brittle quiet. When silence fell, Cadmus shoved past Aurelian and grabbed the folio. He thumbed through pages with librarian fury, eyes scanning for forbidden claims. "You cannot do this," he said. "You tethered a thing into a structure without consent. You altered contract language. Do you realize what you have signed us up for?" He spoke quickly, each word a cut. Aurelian withdrew his hand from the ring and looked at the faint red, burnished sigil along its rim. He did not speak in a long defense. Instead he sat and began to record the altered protocol, pen moving with deliberate strokes. Isolde sat opposite him and watched the ring. Her jaw worked with a tension that rid as both worry and professional note-taking. Matthias stood to the side, hands empty, and admitted, quietly, "I did meet with that society. My notes were meant to map lineage, not to enable control. I misjudged their intent." His confession changed his position from conspirator to culpable witness. Cadmus forced a new decision. "You will hand us the folio, the marginalia, and the ledger entries. We will sequester them and inform the chapter. No one else gets access until we determine ecclesiastical oversight." His voice did not seek collaboration. It demanded surrender. Aurelian looked up from his notes and said, "I will not hand over the protocol unaltered. We will document and present, yes, but we will keep a working copy for safekeeping. The tether is proof we can bind. That proof must be preserved." The exchange produced another short, sharp back and forth. Cadmus slammed a palm to the table and said, "You are asking for unilateral control, Aurelian." "That is not an option," Isolde interjected. "Brother Cadmus, we do not want control. We want containment and evidence. Both are necessary for accountability." The argument read as negotiation. An unexpected twist occurred when Matthias, after a pause, reached into his satchel and produced an annotated ledger entry with a hidden seal. This seal marks donors who expected practical results. They funded field trials they expected. Results: the revelation reframed motives. The shadow society sought application, not theory. Cadmus' face went cold. "Then this is no longer purely doctrinal," he said. "This is practical pursuit of power." The ledger changed the stakes. Daylight crept through a slit in the cellar as they moved the chamber to a charred room. The ritual had left scorch marks along the stone and a faint ring of smoke residue where the sigil had flared. Aurelian placed the ring on the table and watched the mark slowly cool. He recorded the altered protocol in deliberate, exacting phrases, each item numbered, each safety described. He wrote that the binding had manifested a partial presence and that a sigil had burned into the ring, creating a tether. Isolde kept watch at the window. She rubbed her knuckles against the sill. "We did what we came to test," she said, voice low. "Yet I keep thinking of the ledger. Who do we answer to?" Aurelian looked up and said, "To the manuscript, to the safety of people, and to truth. We will not hand this to those who would weaponize it." The sentence was firm. It did not have the rhetoric of oath, but the precision of a plan. They catalogued damage, logged witness statements, and photographed the burned sigil on the ring. Cadmus insisted on including an inventory of the chapel's holdings and a note of the ledger's entries. Matthias provided a chain of custody for the marginalia. The external beats continued: documentation, inventory, confession. Each action shifted loyalties and forced new choices. That night, after they had sequestered the folio inside a locked chest, Aurelian sat alone with the ring under a single lamp. He turned it slowly, watching the sigil's faint scar. His emotional state moved again, from dread to grim resolve. He felt the physical tug of the tether in his palm, as if someone had slipped a cord through bone. He did not romanticize the experience. He catalogued it. It burned a small, precise scar into his memory where the ring had pressed. Isolde came in and perched on the edge of the desk. She touched the folio with gloved fingers and said, "You will record everything in the ledger and send copies to the chapter and to the archive. If we are honest and thorough, we buy time." Aurelian rubbed his temple and said, "Time is what they want. They want methodical access to wield this knowledge. We must be ready for their next move." She looked at him and said, "Then we must prepare as if they will try to take the folio by force." The plan was concrete and immediate. Matthias, once chastened, offered one more twist. He revealed a cross reference in another manuscript that suggested the tethered lineage had been used in a failed experiment decades earlier, producing collateral harm. There was a binding experiment recorded in a nun's ledger that ended with burns to the archivist and a house fire. They buried the records. The information reframed risk as historical precedent. Cadmus' face, in that moment, showed the slow rotation of belief into fear. The chapter closed with practical action. Aurelian copied the altered protocol into 3 versions. One sealed for the chapter, one retained in his private archive, and one placed in a safe deposit outside the convent. He wrote with tight, short sentences, noting the time, the witnesses, and the exact phrasing of the final formula. Isolde bundled the ritual implements for long-term storage. Matthias volunteered to turn over his ledger entries and accept supervised seclusion from ritual rooms. At dawn, Aurelian held the ring to the light, watching a tiny smear where the sigil had singed metal. He recorded the last line in his notebook. The tether had entered into his ring, producing evidence and a burden. He slid the ring into a small box and set it on the desk beside the folio. "Isolde, we have proof, we have a protocol, we have a list of patrons who sought application. We have a choice about how to proceed." Aurelian looked at the smoldering edge of the folio and said, "Then we proceed by preserving limits. Not by handing the device to those with appetite for power." He closed the ledger, snapped it shut, and placed the folio back into its chest. Outside, the first grey of morning found Brother Cadmus at the entryway, keys heavy in his palm, watching them catalogue the damage like a man counting casualties. The final moment was concrete. Aurelian sets the ring on the desk, opens the altered protocol, and places the smoldering folio beneath the lamp as dawn slides across the page. The chapter's conflict had been resolved into a new burden, a tether of proof bound to a man and a ring, and a plan that guaranteed further confrontation. The investigation would continue, and with it, they had made choices that would shape who would hold the mechanism of control. Aurelian burst through the heavy wooden door of the Abbey bell tower and found Isolde on her knees in the chalked ring, the bell's engraved seal flickering like a cut of cold steel. Suspicion drove him forward. His hand closed on his ring without thinking, and the metal felt hotter than the air. "Isolde, stop this," he said, the syllables even and sharp. The sound of the bell teeth grinding in its pivot answered him, low and precise. He did not wait for explanation. Aurelian had read the folio, felt the sigils flare under his fingers in the scriptorium, and heard the cellar knock that fractured the night earlier. Those events still sat under his skin as evidence, not memory. He crouched beside Isolde and saw the chalk lines were fresh, the powdered lime still grainy at the edges. She held a quill over a scrap of vellum, her knuckles white where she gripped it. Suspicion tightened his jaw and guided his first questions. "Isolde, why did you bring this here?" Aurelian demanded. Isolde did not answer at once. The bell seal hummed. The air near it tasted faintly of iron. Her lips parted, and for a long breath she stared at the sigil, as if naming it might alter its geometry. "I needed an answer," she said finally. Brother Siren's footsteps on the spiral stair cut the exchange short. He arrived with 2 novices close behind, faces pale from the night, candles guttering in their hands. "What is happening?" Siren, voice steady but edged. He stopped where the tower widened and studied the ring with a practiced eye. Aurelian kept his gaze on Isolde. Her hair fell in ink, dark strands against her neck. Her robe bore the same antique gold trimming as Aurelian's, but spattered with chalk dust now. You were warned, Aurelian. You know the folio. He tapped the scar on his jaw lightly, a habit that steadied him when irritation rose. He needed to know whether she had opened the folio in secret, or brought the bell to life by other means. Isolde's breath hitched. I read the page, she said. I thought I could control it. I thought I could ask the right question and bind the answer to us. Her voice was small but not frightened. There was an edge of calculation to it that made Aurelian shift on his heels. Outside the tower, a door banged under the force of wind and the bell caused a loose slate to clang. Lucian pushed through the lower hatch before Aurelian could call a name. He carried a locked chest under one arm, its iron bands engraved with unfamiliar markings. He did not bow. He set the chest on the stone floor as if that act alone warranted speech. You should have sent for me, Lucian. Removing the chest lid enough to reveal velvet, wrapped contents and a paper roll. His voice carried the measured confidence of a collector who thought history a resource rather than a warning. Finish the folio. The book hides more than a list. It hides a method. Aurelian's suspicion shifted into anger that tightened his hands. He stepped toward Lucian. You will not touch that folio. The last time these pages moved, the cellar door fell apart and the ink bled light. He swallowed. The image of the rusted clasp splitting in chapter 1 remained precise in his mind. You forced a knock into the night once. Do not do it again. Lucian's mouth ticked. The manuscript wants completion. It is not enough to stare at names. To know the order, you must finish the act. He unrolled the paper slowly, revealing characters that caught the candlelight, and slid it like a blade. Brother Sarin stepped between them, palms raised in a gesture that rarely accompanied his words enough. We stand here to contain, not to complete. If this folio is a map for action, we must make it useless. Aurelian, what does the ring mean? He looked at Aurelian's engraved silver ring, and then at the glow that now crept along the bell's inscription. The ring burned cold where it touched Aurelian's skin. He had worn it for years. It had served as a talisman, a connector to rituals where anchors mattered. The bell's sigil reached for that anchor and clung. When the chalk trembled, Aurelian recognized the pattern. The bell's engraving had been meant to work with a personal focal point. The ring wasn't tea decoration, it was a key. Aurelian made a decision in a single, compressed set of actions. He stripped the ring from his finger and held it near the bell's seal. It pulled at the skin of his palm like static. If I can invert its charge, he said, we can draw whatever forms are rising back into the folio. He paused, thinking through the folio's counter, formulas by motion and touch rather than memory. But the anchor will take damage. The transfer will scar the bearer. Isolde's face changed then, and the change contained both fear and hunger. Then do it, she said. If knowledge costs them harm, let it cost you. We will have the truth afterwards. Aurelian's first emotional shift arrived. Suspicion moved to guarded anger, then to a sharp, brittle resolve. He looked at Isolde, and a line of curiosity creased her forehead as if she heard opportunity. Isolde, he asked softly, did you read beyond the name you spoke in the cellar? Her hand found the quill and clutched it. I read, she answered. I read the instructions for siphoning. I wanted to spare you the cost. I wanted to control the form and ask one question. Lucian promised translation. You promised silence to this thing, Lucian, his voice level. You promised I could bring forth that which was bound in pieces, and thus see the larger pattern. Brother Siren's eyes narrowed. Earlier the manuscript was not a catalogue, but a map for action. You were wrong the first time you said it, Aurelian. This is that map being followed. Isolde slipped a page free from beneath her robe with a movement practiced and quick. She turned it to Aurelian so the crabbed letters could be read by the candle. He felt his throat constrict. The name on the folio was pronounced differently in that script, as a verb. She mouthed it with a quiet precision that scraped across the silence. Isolde, no, Aurelian. He moved to take the page. She shoved the vellum into the circle, and for a breath, a different quality took her voice. It steadied and drew on long vowels with an ease that made even Brother Siren step back. "I call," she said. "I take." The chalk dust lifted as if breathing in response. Lucian lunged. He tried to snatch the page. His hand caught Isolde's wrist. The two men collided and the chest clattered against stone. Aurelian reached into the ring and felt the bell-s sigil pull at him so forcefully the silver bit into his palm. Isolde gasped, then smiled with a small, patient cruelty. "You will understand," she said. The smile did not reach her eyes. The second emotional shift arrived when betrayal overrode suspicion and fear. Aurelian felt betrayal in precise, physical terms. The way Isolde had waited for a gap to act, the motion of her hand tearing the folio, the calculated steadiness of her voice when she pronounced the name. He heard his own pulse as a hammer against bone. "Stop touching me," Isolde suddenly, and her voice pulled the moment in a new direction. Aurelian released the ring. The bell's glow flared. A shape tried to edge into the tower, a pressure that moved the dust motes and tugged at hair. Brother Siren shouted a counter, invocation he learned as a child from a different order. The words were short, blunt, protective. Lucian repeated a line from the paper that altered the rhythm of the bell-s singing. They began a makeshift inversion. Aurelian set his jaw and placed the ring back to the bell, while the others held the chalk circle steady with hands on the lime, so the lines would not blur. Siren chanted, Isolde read a second, hidden line from the page, and Lucian muttered the translation. The voices collided, the bell-s seal strained. Action filled the next minutes in compressed, mechanical motions. Aurelian drove his palm into the sigil while his ring bit cold into flesh. He felt heat and a rip that was not like flame but like a hand pulling at memory. Isolde's reading sharpened. Lucian's translations grew frantic. Brother Siren hammered the final protective syllables and the bell screamed, a sound like metal being pared to a point. Isolde's face convulsed as something answered her name. Her pupils widened and she gripped the quill until it snapped. For a second the tower filled with a chorus of detachments, an animal exhale, a man's whisper, a child's hollow laugh. Isolde's head snapped toward Aurelian and she spoke a name not on the folio. The sound cut the air and drew the manifested pressure toward her. No. Aurelian. He tried to wrench his hand free to pull the incoming form, but the ring had sunk a cold pattern into his skin and his fingers trembled. Isolde, do not. Isolde tore a page from her sleeve and pushed it into the circle. She read a clause the folio had not taught Aurelian. Her voice altered the flow. A portion of the forming thing slid into her like water into a vessel. She staggered and the air around her smelled of charred resin and old skin. Lucian swore and reached for the page. He moved too late. Isolde's eyes shifted. There was a second, quick glare behind them, and then she collapsed forward onto the chalk with a sound that cut off the final syllable. The manifest pressure recoiled and snagged on Aurelian's ring like a barbed hook. Aurelian pulled with all the planning and training he had left. He forced the transfer inward, aligning the ring, matching the cadence the folio suggested, and felt his palm break open as the sigil drew the substance of shape into the sealed vellum. Pain seared across the bone and muscle. He kept the chant in his throat and let his body do the counting. His hand bled into the chalk circle, and the bell's note slammed down until it snapped like a cord. The climax arrived in motion and blunt force. The manifest thing tore a vein of light through the air and crashed into the folio where Aurelian pushed it. The book smoked and the clasps trembled with a sound of burnt iron. Isolde lay crumpled, breathing shallow, and Lucian hit the far wall and slid to the floor as if the wind had unmade his backbone. When the last syllable fell from Aurelian's lips, the folio slammed shut with a noise like bone clicking. The bell's glow vanished, and the chalk lines broke into powder. Aurelian stumbled and fell to his knees. His palm was seared. A ring-shaped brand of blackened sigils marked the skin where his ring had sat. He tasted blood and resin and a small, stubborn clarity. Brother Ciaran moved immediately to the folio, hands steady though his face had gone white. He felt the volume and then he leaned close. The smell of the pages was of ember and old ink. He closed the chest Lucian had brought and wrapped the folio in oilcloth. "It must never see daylight," he said. His voice contained no sermon now, only a command that had the force of a vow. Lucian coughed and tried to sit up. "You have not seen what it holds," he said. "The form we drew, there were pieces of a ledger, a system. This is not mere torment. It is order." Aurelian clenched his jaw and pressed his bleeding palm to his chest, as if to steady the breath. Betrayal still burned under his skin, but so did a different current. A tired, necessary acceptance that he had chosen containment over revelation. "Order built on blood is still a trap," he said quietly. They lifted Isolde between them. Her skin had chilled at the edges and her eyes were open but unfocused. In the light of the tower lantern, she looked like a statue spattered with dust. Brother Ciaran felt the small, strange tremor in her hand and frowned. "There is something left in her," he said, "a residue." Aurelian watched her fingers curl and then unclench. He raised his injured hand and felt the brand throb in time with his pulse. The second emotional shift had already seeded to a third. From betrayal into grim protective resolve. He could no longer trust Isolde's choices, but he would bear the consequence she had attempted to avoid. Lucian fussed with the chest and produced a coil of cord. He rapped the folio and set the chest's lock. The metal clicked in the same key as the bell's rhythm. "We should take it away from here," he said. And for the first time there was an edge to his voice that hinted at fear of the book itself. "We move it to the scriptorium, Brother Ciaran, under lock, with witnesses. Aurelian, will you carry it?" Aurelian felt the weight of the ring's brand and the H in his palm. He nodded once. "I will carry the chest," he said. He thought of the cracked clasp from Chapter 1 and how the folio had once flared under his fingers. Those precise details kept his responses practical. He did not volunteer to be pure or heroic. He volunteered because anyone who had read the folio and felt its pull bore duty to reverse it. They descended the spiral stair on hands and knees, where the stone ran slick with chalk dust. The bell tower emptied into the cloister with a low thud. No one spoke in the damp air until they reached the scriptorium, where the long tables still held papers from the night's earlier work. Aurelian set the chest on the oak, and Brother Ciaran sealed it with wax and a carved rune that matched none of the folio's lines. He drove the wax home with a small iron press. Isolde lay on a bench and blinked slowly. She mouthed words that did not form sentences. When Aurelian knelt to check her, she turned her head and met his gaze without recognition for a breath. "Aurelian," she said, voice brittle, "you saved them. You." He did not let the sentence finish. He answered with the one thing she needed and did not deserve. A short, hard set of instructions. "Brother Ciaran will keep watch. Lucian will leave the chest sealed. You will speak only when asked." He heard the crack in his own voice where the brand throbbed. "Rest." Ciaran set a small bell of his own on the table and placed it beside Isolde's head. "If she wakes and the residue moves, ring this." "I will come." He did not say what he feared. His hands did the speaking. Lucian lingered near the scriptorium's window and watched the grey dawn thin into a pale blue. He looked at Aurelian, and for the first time that night the collector's composure faltered in something like respect. "You closed it," he said. "You paid a price." Aurelian let the words pass. He unwrapped the bandages he had pressed against his palm and ignored the hot sting. He traced the cold brand with a fingertip and felt a faint, residual hum beneath his skin. The hum reminded him of the folio's page that had flared. It suggested not closure but latency. They locked the chest inside a carved cupboard lined with old iron. Brother Ciaran set a stool across the door and hammered 2 nails through the top. He wrote an inscription on a strip of vellum and tied it across the cupboard's handles. "Do not open." The phrase was blunt, practical, and final in a way that suited ritual containment. It named his intention rather than his belief. Isolde slept with a thin film of chalk on her lips. Lucian moved to speak to Aurelian alone, but stopped when Ciaran's hard line of sight angled across the room. "There is more here," Lucian instead, and tapped the sealed chest. "A map to orders. We have destroyed one hing, but not the wheel that turns them," Aurelian answered with a tired, almost academic observation. Because that was the voice that steadied him when Fury wanted to take over. History keeps systems because systems keep power. "We broke a hinge, we did not end an entire machine," Lucian nodded. "Then we must catalogue, not complete. We must watch." The morning moved in small, concrete actions. Linen rags soaked with resin, a bowl of warm water to press Isolde's forehead, a novice sweeping chalk dust into a tight pile. Each action kept them from collapsing into talk and sentiment. Every 30 minutes, Brother Sauron read a short protective list over the cupboard and the scriptorium's outer door. Those lists were mechanical and specific. They mentioned oils, hearth placement, and locked chains. They named needs, not feelings. Aurelian sat with his hand wrapped and thought of the ringest brand. He tested a single phrase in the folio's counter language. The sound scraped his tongue like metal meeting stone. He did not finish the sentence. He would not risk another seizure of form. The baton of responsibility passed quiet and heavy into his lap. He had contained the immediate breach, but the manuscript had taught others how to draw a thing. That knowledge had spread by intention. At midday, a bell tolled from the abbey's outer steeple. A courier had come with a short note addressed to Aurelian. He slit it open with a finger and read Brother Matthias' handwriting. A single sentence requesting that the folio be examined under ecclesiastical seal and transported to the Order's archive, if it could be done without exposing the material. The note was formal and precise. Aurelian folded the paper along the crease and slid it into his pocket. He felt the brand against the fabric and made a decision that would steer what came next. He would not hand the chest to an outside authority without witnesses. He would not let Lucian's hunger for completion go unobserved. He would ask the Abbey Council to convene and bear witness while the folio was removed to a deeper containment under both wax and iron. Isolde woke late in the afternoon. Her eyes focused on the ceiling and then on Aurelian. She reached for him and her fingers brushed his bandaged hand. "Aurelian," she whispered. He took her hand. It was colder than he expected. He felt the ember in the folio like a small stone under his palm. "Do you remember the name you said?" he asked. She closed her mouth and shook her head. Her gaze flicked as if trying to find a thread inside a dark weave. "I do not know if I remember or I have been made to forget," she said. "I thought I could take knowledge without paying for it." Brother Sauron stood at the doorway then, chest set and silhouette sharp in the dim light. "We will record everything you recall." Slowly, in the presence of witnesses. No page will be read alone. His voice did not carry pity. It carried the firmness of a man who had learned how fragile containment could be when curiosity outweighed caution. Isolde nodded once. She tried to rise and stumbled. Aurelian steadied her. He felt an odd, protective surge that was not forgiveness so much as a refusal to let her folly unmake people. He watched the way she mouthed the syllables of a line she could not place. He thought of the cellar knock from Chapter 2, the folio's initial flare in Chapter 1, and how those discrete events had led here with a natural logic. The story had closed a local threat, but not the larger architecture that had allowed it. As dusk thickened into night, they wrapped the scriptorium in daily noise. Candles banked, parchment stacked, locks checked. Brother Sauron took a single iron-studded chest to the abbey's inner vault and left a novice on the door. Lucian departed before moonrise, carrying a small packet of translated fragments that he insisted might still be useful for cataloguing without completion. When Lucian left, Aurelian lingered at the window and watched him move across the courtyard. He noticed how Lucian's shoulders did not carry shame but calculation. It was an observation that did not surprise him. Collectors were always patient. Aurelian returned inside and closed the shutters. Before dawn, they carried the sealed folio back into its carved chest and lowered it to a low bench. Brother Siren took the iron press and wound the wax thick and black around the handles. The chest closed with a final certainty that felt useful for the moment. They lifted it and walked in procession down the scriptorium corridor, past the racks and desks where ink dried in slow, brown rivers. Novices bowed their heads as the chest passed. They set the chest in the carved cupboard, and Brother Siren hammered the lids, closed with 3 heavy nails. He tied the do not open strip twice. They slid the stool across the doors and locked the outer latch. Aurelian breathed, the motion steadying itself not through reflection, but through the body habit of a man used to closing things with his hands. He had sealed a breach and taken a mark. That was concrete. That was action. As dawn poured grey into the windows, the sigil on the folio pulsed once under the wood like a trapped heart. It glowed faint and ember, read for a single breath and died. Brother Siren felt the shiver that passed through the cupboards and did not speak. He made a warding sign with his fingers and sat heavily on the stool. Aurelian ran his uninjured hand along the rim of the cupboard until he found the place where the wood fit imperfectly. He placed the bandage over his brand and then closed his fingers around his pocket where Brother Matthias' note lay folded. He looked at Isolde, asleep now with the chalk dust in her hair, and felt the last current of emotion shift. From betrayal and resolve into an exhausted, guarded hope that concrete measures would hold. He would not trust the hope as a plan. Brother Siren, voice low, announced the practical step to follow. We will make copies of the entry list, burn anything that gives technique, and set watches for 3 nights. If any page stirs, ring the bell. We will convene the council at first light. Aurelian nodded. He tested the brand again with 2 fingertips, and then let his hand fall. I will write a report, he said, every word, every motion. I will sign it with the mark of my ring. He paused and then, with a quiet firmness, added, and I will sleep in the scriptorium tonight. Brother Siren barked a single, short laugh and lifted his chin. And I will take the first watch. They arranged their watches in the exact, specific increments that the folio had taught them to value. Measured hours, daylight overlaps, witnesses at doors. Practicality had replaced rhetoric. It kept them moving. By afternoon the next day, the chest was sealed, the wardings refreshed, and the novices had been given tasks that would keep them from curiosity. Isolde sat by the small window and watched the courtyard. Sometimes she whispered phrases that came like splinters from an unseen place. She spoke of a ledger, of names grouped like ledgers, of arrangements that smelled of accounting more than of torment. The revelation changed the frame. The demons catalogued in the folio were part of a system that assigned roles, not random malice. Aurelian listened and wrote. He recorded her diction, the order of names she recalled, the shape of a phrase that matched Lucian's translations. He kept his notes precise and sealed them in a second envelope. He did not allow the temptation to reconstruct the rite. He catalogued only what would enable containment and witness. That was a line he would not cross again. Weeks later, Brother Matthias's delegation arrived and inspected the chest with clerical formality. They signed the seal and took an inventory, all actions performed in pairs and by candlelight with 2 witnesses at each step. Aurelian stood witness as a man who had both read and acted. He felt the brand under the bandage prickle when the delegation questioned whether the folio might be burned. The delegation hesitated. They saw the echo in Aurelian's hand and chose instead to favor containment under oath. When they finally locked the cupboard and left a message in the official ledger, Brother Siren closed the scriptorium door behind them. The air felt ordinary again, not because danger had ended, but because they had forced procedures to hold it. The folio sat like a sealed wound in the room, its ember reduced to memory. Aurelian walked once more to the window and set his palm against the sill. He could trace the line of scar tissue under the bandage. Blackened, precise, a record of the bell's interest in his flesh. He felt the weight of choices made in motion and the burden of those still to come. He had stopped a gate from opening at midnight. He had borne cost in a way that left a mark and not a sermon. Brother Ciaran set his shoulder to the door and left for his watch. Isolde slept. Lucian's translations sat in a sealed packet waiting for a time when they might be broken down and rendered inert. The folio's ember pulsed nothing more than memory. Aurelian turned from the window and, with one last look at the sealed cupboard, set the candle higher on the scriptorium table and unrolled a fresh sheet of vellum. He began to write the account in short sentences, enumerating the facts. The bell's glow, Isolde's name, Lucian's chest, the inversion, and the brand upon his hand. He noted the pages torn, the lines read aloud, and the exact measures that had contained the manifestation. He wrote the procedures they would follow. Each entry tightened the net around the thing they had unmade. When he signed, he pressed his remaining ring to the wax and left an impression that matched no sigil in the folio. It was a small, human act. A record of one man's careful refusal to let history complete its appetite. Outside, the abbey's bell sounded the hour and answered with a living, wooden certainty. Inside, the chest sat inert. In the folio's ember, a single pulse matched the rhythm of a breathing man and then faded. They had closed the immediate breach. They had contained the manuscript under wax and iron and witness. They had not solved the ledger the folio hinted at, but they had stopped the gate. The final paragraph ties to a concrete act. Aurelian placed the sealed report into the cupboard beside the chest, hammered the small iron press home again, and walked across the table to stand watch until dawn. His bandaged hand resting on the wood as if testing the pulse beneath it.